It is still the conversation segment of the Signature Show, and you know the issue we've been discussing. We just finished speaking with Rotimi in respect of EFCC officials breaking into his house in the early hours around 4 a.m., arrested him, took him to Ibadan, put bail conditions before he could go home. By the time he came back to his house had been cleaned out. We did not know whether it was the same EFCC officials who arrested him who cleaned out his house, or some people else, some persons else. But there are legal issues, and in this second segment, we are conversing with Barrister Ocholi Okutekpa. Ocholi, you're welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Now, let me rewind the story a little bit for you. This young man lives in Abeokuta, and around 4 a.m., people break into his house, to his door. He's frightened. In fact, his story is that he thought they were armed robbers until he saw EFCC written on their jackets. And they arrested him on suspicion of fraud, being an internet fraudster, and took him from Abeokuta to Ibadan. According to him, on the way, he said to them, they were conversing with them, according to him, that here's my laptop, here's my phone. If you don't find anything on me, I hope you give me transport money to return. But EFCC detained him about 3 days.
3 days?
Yes. And then let him go on bail conditions. He must bring a lawyer, he must bring somebody with a certain level of property ownership in that area. I want to find out from you first, is it within the functions and conditions for EFCC or the police to determine such bail conditions when they're investigating you?
Oh, absolutely. It's within their powers, because what you want to secure at the time is the attendance of the accused person to answer questions, or for the investigation not to be halted or tampered with. So the bail condition is just to safeguard that attendance or the ability to retain the connection with the accused person, because ordinarily what should follow is investigation, or what should continue is investigation. So you may want to invite him back, and you don't want him to just leave and that's it. Because sometimes when people are arrested or invited, there's this apprehension. So you want to be sure he's not leaving town and changing his phones and all of that. So the bail conditions, very often, like you would know, there'll be a surety, or a person of means, someone that you can hold to produce the suspect. So that's why they have the powers to do that.
Help me, when the police or the EFCC tells me bail is free, doesn't it contradict it when you say bail is free and you say, go and bring a surety who owns property, go and bring a lawyer?
No. Like I said, that's not a payment. That's a safeguard. They're two different things. So you are not paying for the release, because once you are able to pay for the release, then investigation is already compromised, because the investigator should be put in a position where he's not interested or getting any pecuniary benefit from the process. That's what it means that bail is free. So this is about a safeguard. Can we have this guy again? Can we have him come back for questioning? Can we have him come back, for investigation to proceed? All right. And if we come to the legal advice that he should be charged to court, you need to produce a human being before the court. You won't be charging a person you can't.
There's another dimension to this that bothers me. The police coming to arrest me, it presumes that they have established substantial basis to suspect me or to find me to have committed a crime. Should they not have completed their investigation before coming to pick me up? That is one. Two, I'm sleeping in my house, and pardon my language, some characters break down my door and enter, for me to find out thereafter that they are either policemen or EFCC operatives. Is this process right?
Okay, to start with your first question, they must not complete investigation before they arrest or invite. because a lot of times investigation cannot even be completed until they hear your side of the story or you are interrogated. That's why not everybody that's arrested or invited gets charged to court. Because when you hear the other side of the story, although I admit, unfortunately in Nigeria, like they say in local parlance, nobody who report to police first. But unfortunately in Nigeria, very often, if you run to the police or to the law enforcement first, you are seen as a friend of the law enforcement and the other person is seen as a devil. And that's a very big issue. All right, so it's important to invite, in certain cases, arrest, to be able to hear the other side of the story. And that's why the presumption of innocence, which is a constitutional safeguard, should be preserved through that process, where you are informed, this is why we're inviting you, this is why we are arresting you, and you have the right to remain silent, you have the right to a lawyer, and all of that. That's the process, all right? Even a suspect that is arrested. But the situation here is, once it comes to the point of arresting, the law enforcement is already acting hostile. Like you have committed a crime, you have been found guilty, and you know they are just executing a sentence. But that's not supposed to be. Now, that takes us to your second question.
Yes. Somebody just barges into my house, break down my door, my heart sinks 1,000 times. I could faint.
Oh, absolutely. People have lost their lives in such situation. But you know, the point is, you know, it's just like the famous saying, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely. The question is this: where law itself does not have enforceability, which is one of the things we are dealing with in Nigeria, would there be consequence on any officer of the EFCC, of the police, or any agency who goes beyond the law in practicing the law? Hardly. Hardly.
Yeah, but what is the law in arresting me?
No. You know, in such
in breaking into my house.
No, you can't break into his house. You can't. There are various ways you can effect arrest. Somebody can be arrested at the scene of a crime on suspicion of being part of it, you know, and see how fine the Constitution made it. Because notwithstanding that you caught him in the act, he's still a suspect. Because the powers to find him guilty or to make a pronunciation of guilt resides in the court. You are just an investigative agency to bring him before the court. So the fact that you caught him in the act is just part of what you are going to put forth before the court. All right? You can also invite. I mean, if there's a complaint, you can invite. If there's good suspicion from whatever source, you can get a warrant of arrest, a search warrant, so that you can gain lawful entry. All right? And that's why when it comes to, the courts have had cause to pronounce on the use of self-help by several agencies in different circumstances. But like I said, when there are no consequences, you know, to the breach of the law, particularly by the law enforcement themselves, then you have a problem. And this is why fundamental right enforcement proceedings are everywhere. I mean, when we get tired of the regular courts, we go to regional courts like ECOWAS, because the African Charter on Human Rights and all of that also gives safeguard to citizens of this country as members of ECOWAS. So it's unfortunate that that happens, because when you look at it also, you also look at even the time of effecting the arrest. I mean, these are all issues that, you know, go beyond the realm of the boundaries of the law to law enforcement doing what they feel I can do and nothing will happen. But, and if you follow criminal cases in this country, you realize that they select their victims carefully. There are people who are invited with tea and coffee. I mean, they are even escorted down, you know, sit in AC, the investigation room.
Those become public relations for them.
Exactly. But you are dealing with a boy, what's his father's name? Who is he? What office is he occupying? So unfortunately, the one who doesn't have the capacity, you know, to command some respect from them, or you are not unfortunate enough to be in opposition. Because sometimes, even those who are powerful, if you are in opposition, you are rough-handed. Exactly. So it's just a matter of who the law is being practiced against or who the law is being enforced against. So those are circumstances that may lead to, in some cases, the suspect going to court to say, you know what, my constitutional right in XYZ provisions have been, yeah, exactly.
Ocholi, there are two other issues. One is that EFCC, after arresting him and releasing him on those bail conditions, went ahead and uploaded his name on their website, indicating that so-and-so person, Rotimi so-and-so person, is a suspected fraudster. His friends, let me quote him, some of his businesses he does with Google and Co. have had to suffer. Some of his friends call and, let me use local parlance, oh boy, you don't join Yahoo. And the young man feels bad, very bad. Is EFCC within the law to have uploaded his picture and his name as a suspected fraudster?
That's a tricky one, and I would explain why I think it's tricky. And I would also proffer some arguments that I believe would be the position of the law. You know, we live in a very dynamic world where crime itself or offending the law is in evolution. That's why we now have the Cyber Crime Protection Act and all of that. Conventional law, what has the courts have to deal with repeatedly is the issue of parading in public before journalists, suspects, before they are even charged to court. The courts have had opportunity to pronounce on that, to say, you know what, that is infringing on his constitutional right to be presumed innocent. In a certain case, Ubong, an IG of police, the Federal High Court in Lagos slammed punitive damages in the sum of 20 million naira against the police. But like you know, the police has not stopped. Why do I say? Of course. Why do I say? In fact, I read in my research, in Bangladesh, it's been outlawed. Totally. Don't do it. Don't parade them. Why this person is still supposed to enjoy the presumption of innocence. What is the role of the investigating agency? The role is to investigate, and if you come to the conclusion that there's a case, go to the court. The court is public enough, and I'll tell you why the court is public enough. The court does not parade, but the court gives access, so that as a journalist in court, your full report is that the plea was read to him and he pleaded not guilty.
Or guilty.
Or guilty.
Anyway.
Whoever wants to form an opinion as a business associate can then form an opinion to say,
From
you know
the
what?
court process.
From the court process. Where do I say your question is tricky? EFCC may have learned sense from the ordeals of the police with the cases that have been instituted against them. I said, you know what? Let's not parade, but let's have a website. The question then becomes, which I can argue, the question then becomes, what is www? World Wide Web. The world is now a global village. My argument is that that is as public parade, because the circumstance in law where parading is permitted, even in our law, is identification parade. And it has certain conditions that has to be fulfilled before you do identification parade. A suspect arrested in the course of committing an offense does not need to go through identification parade because you know who you arrested. Some of the conditions of parading for identification and not in public is crime is suspected to have happened. The victim had little time of interaction with the suspect. The suspect is not a person known to the victim. So the investigative agency parades people of the same height, size, shape, or similar to the person arrested, so that the victim, who had little time, can see like 8 or 9 persons similar to the person who is suspected, and come to the conclusion that I haven't gone through all of this. This is the person that is likely to be the one. And the way it happens in law is to put the suspect with 8 innocent persons. That's identification part. This is not a public show. This is for the purpose of investigation and for the purpose of the victim making an identification. So where's my argument? What is the utility of EFCC running a website where suspects are paraded to the whole world?
World Wide Web.
Where? So that I go to EFCC website to go and form opinion of who I think is already guilty. So why don't they chill? Like Igbo people say, chire. Let's go to court where the public has full view. Because in court also, any journalist can apply for and get the charge, the proofs of evidence, and know. Because if I'm doing business with you, I can form a better opinion from the proofs of evidence. Like in the case of this gentleman, with the conversations I heard you make. See my phone, see my laptop. What? I don't know what you are talking about. But a journalist who goes to court and obtains the charge and the proofs of evidence can do proper journalism. To say, you know what? A journalist has the liberty to come to conclusion based on what he sees. I don't even see anything in the proofs of evidence. That's a better reporting. But what this does, like I say, World Wide Web, I can sit in Atlanta. I can sit in Spain. I can sit in Antarctica, anywhere, and form an opinion that ABC is a Yahoo boy.
Now, actually, that's a second part to this. When the young man was taken away, while he was in police custody, his house, EFCC custody, his house was cleaned out. Don't forget the story I told you. His house was broken into, the doors broken, so the EFCC official took him away. By the time he came back, his house was cleaned out. I don't want to know who cleaned it out. Who's liable for this cleaning out of the young man's house?
That's a question for the court.
It's a question for the court.
Yes, because if he chooses to challenge the entire process, you know, what you need to define distinction here. And this is where most of our law enforcement agencies need education. Do they have the right of arrest? Yes, if they follow the processes of law. Do they have right to investigation? Absolutely. I can even walk out of this studio and somebody say you are worthy of investigation. You have right. But how? So, without attempting to give legal advice on TV, he has rights as to how the process was followed and the consequence of the process. Because if you broke into my house, took me away, to my mind, the natural thing that will follow is that my house is exposed. If you came inviting me or even arresting me as a person that should retain any type of human honor, human right, you will let me lock my door. But if you broke in through the window, like a thief in the night, if I enter the Bible, if you broke in through the window or broke my door down, whisk me away, and I live alone, what have you done? You have aided another crime against me. So that is why, unfortunately, I must confess to you, Nigerians find it difficult to pursue their rights, although it's not baseless. Because when you want to pursue rights and COVID-19 happens, an adjournment happens, and you are still filing papers, 2 years is going, in some cases, courts are overwhelmed, and you know, it's sad. I don't know if you also know that statistically, we are dancing between 65 to over 70% of our prisons being occupied by inmates who are awaiting trial. So, you know, all of that makes it very difficult for a lot of Nigerians to actually assess justice, as it were. So there are options open to him, absolutely.
Options open to him. Ocholi, let's conclude this conversation with an interesting question as far as I'm concerned. This young man who had been paraded, this young man who's lost his property by however or whatever means, what remedies are available to him?
Well, just so that the answer is practical, he should take his remedies carefully. Because in our current reality, when an investigative agency has you and you go and take too much remedy, they will use their power. They can revoke the bail on any ground.
This is wisdom and not law.
No, I wanted to start with wisdom before I land in the law. So please consider your options carefully. All right, like I said, the process of the arrest itself, the consequence of that process, he may find rights in fundamental rights. But while I'm saying that, I don't just stop with the wisdom part. There's still constitutional safeguard. He can seek certain reliefs very quickly in the fundamental right enforcement process, whether in our local court, in the regional court, under the African Charter for the regional court, or the Constitution in the case of any of our local courts. So such rights, are available to him. Nicely, he's on bail. In some cases, it's sad. I mean, the person is even locked up. I mean, some people have been held for months, honest truth. All right, so there are such rights available to him. But, of course, like I said, you mix wisdom and law as far as we are in this country. Absolutely necessary. So I'm sure if he speaks to lawyers, they would have considerations for him that may be useful.
Ocholi, just one last request. Why is it that our law enforcement seems to lack humanity?
It's a problem that cuts across every aspect of our society. It's not just law enforcement. The answer will lead to a fresh conversation. We are fundamentally flawed in several respects. So law enforcement, for the most time, some people are in law enforcement just to make money. I mean, suspect is picked, bargain begins. Honest truth. I mean, these are daily realities. All right. You also have a situation where law enforcement don't even know what law is. I mean, I believe that agencies that enforce the law in this country should undergo more training than even a lawyer. I mean, repeated training. For instance, in my profession, you have continuous legal education, which you must do every other year to be considered a lawyer that knows what he's doing, because you need to keep improving. So you have law enforcement officers in all the agencies who do not even know what the constitutional safeguard of the suspect is. In fact, everybody in law enforcement should be an expert on the safeguards available to the suspect in law. But to just try to tie it to something of many things, if there are no consequences for the breach or abuse of the law, leave it.
Well, if there are no consequences for the abuse of the law, I won't agree with him that we should leave it. We should be conversing on it until our establishment, until our institutions realize that anybody who goes to fend the process must pay for it. Well, in the past 30 minutes or thereabout, I've been conversing with Ocholi Okutekpa, an Abuja-based lawyer, and a friend of the house indeed, on the issue of Rotimi, an Abeokuta-based young man who was picked up in the early hours of the morning in circumstances the young man says he's still confused about. Let us see where this conversation will lead us to. All for now we can do is to thank Ocholi for coming. Ocholi, thanks very much for coming.
My pleasure.
Let the conversation continue next Sunday. My name never changes. It remains Mwabwez and Joko. Good afternoon.